So this project just continues to be full of firsts. First time taking a big black Chrysler apart, first time building the Pro Street type car, first time building my own frame, first time lining up my own suspension, first time having big giant tires in something. There's a whole lot of firsts in this project, a whole lot of things I've never done before. Like this. So yeah, never dropped a piston before either. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. We're not going to be using this again anyway. I'll get into that later. So even if this snout's a little worn or whatever the case was with that thing just falling right off, shouldn't be an issue. I expected it. Yeah, that is definitely a loose timing chain. Ow. Getting the distributor drive here. I got a slurry with some water in it. I certainly wasn't trying to do that. I can't believe I just did that. There's a piece of piston in here somewhere. There it is. This is the face of heartbreak. That was not what I wanted to do. That wasn't even a freaking facsimile of what I wanted to do. Just a big. Alright. Can I have you mention I broke a piston? Alright, so here's our lifters. These last 6 were stuck in the block because all that crust around the bottom, but some moisture also got into the engine. Get into that in a second. Camshaft shows where the moisture got in, so I won't really be able to reuse that cam. And I just measured it. It's like a 410 lift anyway, so it's a pretty tiny cam. There's that mistake I made, obviously. It renders the pistons useless, or at least this one. But I think what I want to do is I want to pop this oil pump open. If there's water in the oil pump, then I know that it was getting sucked up and running through the engine, and yes, there is some kind of a water leak somewhere in the block. If there's no water in this oil pump, that means all the water in there got in there when the engine was not running. So let me pop that apart real quick and then we'll take a look. Alright, so we got the oil pump apart, and that is just oil in there. There's no evidence of water being in it. So yeah, I think it's safe to say the water in the pan and the water that got to the back of this camshaft probably entered the engine as it was sitting around after it had already been pulled out of the car. Alright, so here's a preliminary look at these cylinder heads. I think I could say, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe there was a bunch of leaking going on here, actually. If you look here on the gasket, for instance, it's really wet with oil in between these 2 cylinders. It's wet with oil all over the place. You've got a bunch of spots where corrosion's kind of taken over there. It's punched holes where they weren't before. That's rotten through. But they all have those these marks. Now the question is that just copper coat? That looks like copper gasket coat. But it is wet, so I'm thinking it is leaking. That one's really bad in between the 2 cylinders. It was black and oily. Alright, so anyway. So now we get to look at these, and what we're looking for is cracks, like between the valves or anywhere else where it looks like water was going from the water ports into something else. So right around these ports here. Right here on this corner. Might have been some moisture getting in there, but doesn't really look like it went all the way through. Maybe there. So interesting. So let's go look at the engine block and see if we see anything goofy in here. So yeah, so I'm not sure what was going on here, but it looks like both gaskets were leaking in a lot of spots. Upon closer inspection, these head gaskets show a lot of evidence, and so do the cylinder heads themselves, of water or steam actually going between the water passages and the combustion chamber, the cylinder. So that's probably what was causing our overheating, and the reason I say that is because during the compression and combustion that happens in the cylinder pressures are really, really high, like extremely high, especially during the combustion section. So what happens is that cylinder pressure gets pushed through a leaky head gasket into the water ports, and you end up with water that starts boiling, and but even worse is you end up with a lot of air pockets in your cooling system. You get a lot of air pumped into it, and it's hot, nasty, gross air, and that will definitely lead to overheating issues. And then during the intake stroke, what happens is the pressure in your your cooling system is much higher than it is in the cylinder, and so the water moves that way. So you've got a leak that's moving in 2 directions depending on what part of the 4-stroke cycle you're in. So I'm 99% sure that's why our engine was overheating. I don't expect to find any cracks that would cause overheating. Now that being said, hang on. That being said, we did see a couple of cracks in between the valves on the cylinder heads, or at least on video it looked like cracks. I needed to pull the valves out and take a really good look with magnifying glass. but it definitely looked like we had a couple of cracks in the cylinder head. But I would think that's more of a symptom than a cause. The crack right there is probably because the engine was overheated. So it cracked between that space in between the valve seats gets really hot. There's no water there to cool it. So it gets super hot, and cracking there doesn't usually get into a water jacket. So that probably had nothing to do with the overheating, but it probably is a result of the overheating. That's how I should put it. The other thing about why I think the cylinder head was leaking water into the cylinders, I told you that if you had a water leak getting into a cylinder, you would have a steam cleaned piston. You have a really shiny piston and a really clean combustion chamber. Well, we didn't see any clean combustion chambers on the cylinder heads, but we did see was pistons that were clean around the edges. We had 3 or 4 of these that were clean around the edge like that, while the rest of them were a uniform black color, like this nasty one here. Nope, that's got a little cleaning around the edges too. That, I believe, is evidence that there was steam in the cylinders. Not a ton of steam, or else it would have been much cleaner, but what you can see in this one is that the carbon that's left is actually really flaky, and you can kind of scratch it off real easy. So I believe that this was getting steamed and it was loosening up that carbon. So I'm pretty sure that's what was going on. So it looks like we're going to be able to run this engine in one configuration or another. At least we'll be able to use this block. I still got to clean it out really good, and I might go down and get it magnafluxed at a machine shop or something just to make sure, but I don't see anything here that would indicate that there was any issue with the block. And once I clean it up and take a good close inspection of it, if I don't see anything pretty obvious, I'll probably just run it and not worry too much about it. So, as far as the crank goes, I told you guys I had no intentions of using this cast crank that came out of the engine. Well, like I said, we'll get into that a lot more once I start talking about our options for the engine and whatnot. But basically, I have a forged crank sitting there I can put in this thing. And I want to say thank you to a guy named Jason who gave me this crank. My friend Ed, who's the guy I got this engine from, I asked him if he knew anybody who might have a 383 crank laying around I could buy, and he called his buddy Jason, who was about to come out vacationing from Washington, and Jason brought a crank with him and he gave it to me. So thank you very much, Jason. I really appreciate you doing that. I often give people free car parts and stuff all the time, so I appreciate you paying it forward, and I will absolutely continue helping people out as well. So thank you. I appreciate that. But we'll get into that later, like I said. In the meantime, I just want to say thanks for watching. I appreciate all our subscribers, and we've had a lot of new guys over the last couple of weeks. Welcome. Thanks for subscribing. And I think a lot of you came over from someone else's channel. If you did, please put that in the comments so I can say thank yous where they're due. I guess that's about it. So next one, we'll probably get into the rear diff again. Now that I can get both tires under the back of the truck, I can start taking some measurements, and we can start getting the parts going and maybe start working on that rear differential pretty soon. Once the differential's done, then we can tie the tires together, set them in place, start doing things like putting a suspension on there, building frame rails, that kind of stuff, once I know where everything's going to end up. Anyway, thanks a bunch. I do appreciate all of you, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.